Now that we've built a clear understanding of the different types of liquidity risk that banks face, the next logical step is to examine how banks structure themselves to manage these risks effectively. In this session, we're going to explore the organisational side of liquidity risk management. We'll look at the key roles played by different teams within a bank, how responsibilities are divided, and how governance is structured to ensure accountability, escalation, and decision-making. We'll also touch on the systems and data infrastructure that enable these teams to do their jobs and how international banks coordinate liquidity across multiple jurisdictions and legal entities. By the end of this session, you'll have a detailed understanding of what a robust liquidity management framework looks like in practice and what it takes to make that framework work day in, day out. So let's begin with the core functions. At the heart of liquidity management is the Treasury function. Treasury is responsible for the day-to-day management of the bank's cash, funding, and liquidity buffers. It ensures the bank has enough cash to meet obligations, plans ahead for funding needs, and manages the portfolio of high-quality liquid assets. Treasury acts as the central hub for managing liquidity risk in real time. It monitors balances, executes market transactions, and liaises with counterparties and central banks. In many banks, Treasury also owns the funds transfer pricing mechanism, which allocates liquidity costs across the organisation, a key topic we'll cover in more depth in a future session. Closely supporting Treasury is the Liquidity Risk Management team. Now, this function may sit within the broader Treasury team or risk department, or exist as a standalone specialist team. Its role is to provide independent oversight of the bank's liquidity position, policies, and risk appetite. It develops and calibrates liquidity risk metrics and limits, performs scenario analysis, and designs stress tests. It also plays a major role in regulatory engagement, producing parts of the ILAP, responding to supervisory reviews, and ensuring compliance with local and global liquidity regulations. Now, while Treasury is responsible for managing liquidity risk ensures that Treasury operates within a well-defined risk framework. Then there's finance, which plays a supporting but crucial role. Finance teams provide the data needed for liquidity forecasting, things like actuals and expected cash flows, maturity profiles, and behavioural assumptions. Finance may also own the balance sheet strategy, working with Treasury and risk to align liquidity with capital planning and earnings objectives. In some institutions, finance are involved in liquidity reporting, particularly regulatory returns submitted to authorities like the PRA in the UK or the European Central Bank. Another key player is technology. Managing liquidity risk today is impossible without accurate, timely data. Technology teams build and maintain the infrastructure needed for real-time liquidity dashboards, forecasting models, risk reporting engines, and scenario simulation tools. They ensure that source systems feed clean, reconciled data into the liquidity management process. They also support automation, which is increasingly important as banks handle more complex stress scenarios, greater regulatory granularity, and shorter reporting timelines. Overseeing all of these functions is governance. At the top sits the board of directors, which ultimately owns the bank's risk appetite, including its tolerance for liquidity risk. The board approves key policies, reviews liquidity reports, and ensures that management has the resources and capabilities to manage risk appropriately. In larger banks, the board may delegate this responsibility to a risk committee, which meets regularly to oversee all material risks, including liquidity. Beneath the board is the executive management, typically through a dedicated asset and liability committee, or ALCO for short. ALCO is the central decision-making body for liquidity risk. It brings together Treasury, risk, finance, and business units to review the bank's liquidity profile, approve funding strategies, set or adjust limits, and respond to changes in market conditions. ALCO usually meets monthly, but during periods of stress, it may convene weekly or even daily. Supporting ALCO may be a liquidity risk committee, particularly in larger or more complex firms. This committee focuses specifically on liquidity issues, reviewing risk metrics, analysing stress test results, and recommending actions. It provides a forum for escalation and challenge, ensuring that decisions are well informed and consistent with the bank's risk appetite. Some banks also establish working groups or forums focused on specific aspects of liquidity, such as contingency funding plans, FTP governance, or regulatory change implementation. To ensure accountability, most banks use a 3 lines of defence model. The first line of defence consists of business units and Treasury, who are responsible for managing liquidity on a day-to-day basis within the approved risk framework. The second line includes risk and compliance, who oversee and challenge the first line, ensuring policies are followed and limits are respected. And the third line is internal audit, which independently assesses the effectiveness of the liquidity risk framework and governance arrangements. This model helps ensure that liquidity risk is managed consistently with appropriate checks and balances. In terms of systems and infrastructure, modern liquidity management depends on a suite of tools. At the core is a liquidity reporting engine which consolidates data from across the bank to produce daily metrics, things like the liquidity coverage ratio, intraday positions, and maturity mismatch reports. Now, these systems often feed into dashboard platforms, allowing Treasury and risk teams to monitor liquidity in near real time. Now, many banks also use forecasting tools to project future liquidity positions under different scenarios. Now, these tools incorporate assumptions about cash flows, customer behaviour, market conditions, and regulatory requirements. Some banks go further by integrating machine learning or predictive analytics, allowing for dynamic stress testing and real-time insights into emerging risks. Another critical system is the funds transfer pricing engine, which calculates the internal cost of funding for each business line. Now, this system helps ensure that business units are charged fairly for the liquidity they consume, encouraging behaviour that aligns with the bank's overall liquidity strategy. For example, a business that relies on short-term funding to finance illiquid assets would face a higher internal funding charge, discouraging risky mismatches. Banks also invest in regulatory reporting platforms. These are essential for meeting external requirements such as submitting the LCR and NSFR returns to supervisors. In the UK and EU, these reports must be submitted regularly and often under tight timelines. The accuracy, completeness, and timeliness of these returns are critical. Errors can lead to supervisory scrutiny, penalties, or even reputational damage. In today's environment, system integration is a major challenge. Liquidity management requires data from a wide range of systems, core banking platforms, trading systems, payment infrastructure, risk models, and finance systems. Harmonizing this data across products, currencies, legal entities, and geographies is a major operational effort. That's why banks increasingly invest in data governance frameworks, appointing data owners, establishing quality controls, and using reconciliation tools to ensure reliability. For international banks, coordination across legal entities and jurisdictions adds another layer of complexity. Liquidity can be trapped in subsidiaries due to local regulations, ring fencing, or currency controls. A group-level liquidity surplus may hide shortfalls in specific regions. To manage this, banks often establish entity-level liquidity risk frameworks, ensuring that each legal entity is self-sufficient under stress. Group Treasury monitors the overall picture and allocates resources as needed, but also works closely with local Treasury teams to understand local nuances. Regulators increasingly expect banks to manage liquidity on both a solo and consolidated basis. Now, that means demonstrating that each entity can survive its own stress scenario, not just relying on the strength of the parent. In the UK, the PRA is explicit about this expectation. In the EU, the ECB supervisory approach is similar. Cross-border liquidity transfers may require approvals or face restrictions in a crisis. Banks must prepare accordingly, often by maintaining buffers locally and establishing intragroup funding arrangements that can be executed quickly and legally under stress. Communication also plays a vital role. Liquidity managers must maintain regular dialogue with central banks, clearinghouses, payment system operators, and key counterparties. During stress events, open lines of communication can be the difference between resolution and escalation. Many banks conduct liquidity dry runs, tabletop exercises that simulate a crisis and test the bank's ability to execute its contingency plans, escalate internally, and engage with external stakeholders. And culture matters too. A strong liquidity culture is one where business decisions are made with awareness of their funding implications, where Treasury and risk are seen as partners rather than enforcers, and where liquidity is considered not just in crisis, but as part of day-to-day management. Now, this culture is supported by training, communication, and the tone from the top. When boards and senior executives talk about liquidity risk, not just as a compliance issue, but as a strategic priority, it cascades through the organisation. Let's not overlook outsourcing and third-party risk, which increasingly plays a role in liquidity. Banks often rely on external service providers for data feeds, analytics tools, cloud hosting, or even some treasury functions. These dependencies create new risks. If a key vendor fails or is disrupted, the bank's ability to monitor or manage liquidity may be impaired. Regulators expect banks to map these dependencies and ensure robust controls are in place. Now, this is especially important in light of growing cyber risk and operational resilience expectations. Now, to sum up, effective liquidity management is not just about having enough cash. It's about having the right people, the right processes, the right systems, and governance in place. Treasury runs the engine room. Risk sets the guardrails. Finance provides the data. Technology powers the tools, and governance ties it all together, ensuring that decisions are informed, responsibilities are clear, and the bank can act quickly when conditions change. The structure may vary by institution, but the principles are consistent. Clear ownership, effective oversight, robust data, integrated systems, and a strong risk culture. When all of these elements are in place, a bank can manage its liquidity not just reactively, but strategically, seizing opportunities, navigating shocks, and building trust with stakeholders. In our next session, we'll shift our focus from the organisational setup to the regulatory framework, starting with the liquidity coverage ratio. We'll explore how this key metric is calculated, what it measures, and how banks manage their buffers to meet it day after day. We'll also cover the regulatory expectations around LCR reporting and how supervisors use it to assess resilience. I'll see you in the next session.